So for me, a key development was when we started in the early 2000s to design trials based around the fact that PET could give us an early readout of whether or not treatment was working in patients with lymphoma. And we did that work, first of all, in patients with early stage Hodgkin lymphoma in a trial which we used the acronym RAPID for. And the second trial was in patients with advanced Hodgkin lymphoma, for which the trial acronym was RATHL. So in RAPID, what we did was we took patients who had responded on an early PET scan, and we gave half of those patients radiotherapy. To the other half of patients, we gave no further treatment. And what we found was that over 90% of patients who received chemotherapy, regardless of whether or not they received radiotherapy, they were likely to be cured. Now, it's important to note that patients who do not receive radiotherapy have a slightly increased risk of relapse, up to about 6%. But we think that will be offset by the fact that patients will experience fewer side effects in the future if they're able to avoid radiotherapy. And perhaps what's key for me is the fact that it's actually given patients choices. Nowadays, there's a discussion at the beginning of treatment around whether or not patients should receive radiotherapy based on the fact that we know that the majority of patients will be cured without needing radiotherapy, and we can actually target radiotherapy to the people that really need it. In the RATHL trial, what we did was slightly different. Again, we took an early PET scan and looked at what was happening. If it looked like the patient was responding very well to treatment, we randomized patients. Half of the patients got our usual standard treatment, which is chemotherapy using 4 drugs. The other half of patients, we actually dropped one of those drugs from the regime. It's a drug called bleomycin. And bleomycin, we know, causes side effects in the lungs. And what we found at the end of the trial was that those patients who'd only received 3 drugs after having a very good PET scan, if you like, had exactly the same survival as those patients who'd received full course chemotherapy, but importantly, they had fewer side effects. Also, what we did was in that trial, we took patients who the PET scan looked like the treatment wasn't working as well as we'd hoped. And instead of giving those patients our usual chemotherapy, we switched to a more intensive type of chemotherapy. And what we found was that we were then able to cure about 2/3 of patients. And that compared very favorably with what had happened in the past, because in the past, we know that if patients had a PET scan that suggested that the treatment wasn't working very effectively, if we just carried on with the same chemotherapy, only about 1 in 5 patients would expect to be cured. So for me, that was a really huge development, because what we were able to do was to use that early PET scan to tailor the right treatment for the right individual patient. And it is a key development, because I would say it's the first time that we've actually been able to individualize treatment for patients based on imaging, and specifically PET imaging.